Okay, welcome back. We're going to talk now about our first real topic in consumer math, which is calculating what is called your straight time pay. And this is for people who make an hourly wage. Okay, so our goals, our objectives are to calculate straight time pay, overtime pay, and total pay, and also to understand what those mean. We've got some vocabulary terms to go through before we get to the actual math. So we'll start with talking about hourly rate. The hourly rate, if you work for a business that pays you an hourly rate, this is simply the amount of money paid for each hour, H-O-U-R, of work. That is your hourly rate. So for instance, when I first got my first job, I started working at the town park as a lifeguard, I was paid $7.50 an hour, okay? And every year that went up a quarter until I was making, probably by the end, like $9.50 an hour. This is much before the minimum wage went up, all right? So the hourly rate is just how much you're paid for each hour of work you do. Your straight time pay is the total amount of money earned for a pay period at the hourly rate. So, a couple things in here. A pay period is just the period of time in which how much money you're making is being calculated. Usually a pay period is like 2 weeks. So like you get a paycheck every 2 weeks. And we'll talk more about how often you get paychecks soon. So total amount of money earned for a pay period at the hourly rate. So basically it's your hourly rate, that's how much you make per hour. And then this also takes into account how many hours you've worked, okay? Say you work 25 hours and you make $10 an hour, then whatever the product of those two is, when you multiply those two numbers together, 25 hours times $10 per hour, that is going to give you your straight time pay. All right? And a matter of fact, the equation for that is right down here. Straight time pay equals hourly rate times the number of hours worked. It makes sense. If I were to pay you $5 an hour for 4 hours, you would expect to make $20 because 5 times 4 is 20. Now, sometimes some jobs may offer what is called overtime pay. Overtime pay is extra pay for hours worked beyond regular. I'm going to put in parentheses, usually this means any hours beyond or over 40 hours. Okay? So the typical work week in America right now is 40 hours per week. If you work more than that, sometimes you are eligible for overtime pay. All right? And that basically means you're going to be making more money and at a greater rate. Okay? The overtime rate is usually bigger than the regular rate to give you an incentive to work overtime. There's two types of overtime rates that we're going to talk about. There's something called time and a half, and there's something called double time. Time and a half is an overtime rate of 1.5, remember that number, that's very important, times the normal hourly rate. So, if you are making overtime and if your company offers time and a half, what that means is for any hours that are considered overtime hours, for any hours you work over 40 hours a week, then you're not going to make your regular rate, you're going to make 1.5 times your regular hourly rate while you're working overtime, and only while you're working overtime, not for your normal hours, just for your overtime hours. There are other ways to calculate overtime, but we'll get to those later. Double time is similar, but instead of being 1.5 times, it's an overtime rate that's twice as much as you normally make. Different companies have different philosophies and different policies on their overtime, so that's why we talk about both time and a half and double time. So, in order to calculate your overtime rate, you take your regular hourly rate and multiply by either 1.5 if it's time and a half, if your company is offering time and a half, or 2 for double time. Let me give you an example of this. Let's say that your normal hourly rate is $10 per hour. If you work overtime and your company offers time and a half, that $10 per hour would increase to $15. If your company offers double time, your $10 per hour for the overtime hours would increase to $20. So you can see that's an incentive to work overtime hours. They will pay you more money for working the same amount of time. To calculate your overtime pay, you take your overtime rate and you multiply by the number of overtime hours. Very similar to straight time pay, where you take your normal hourly rate and multiply by the number of normal hours you work. The only difference with overtime is that you take your overtime rate, not your regular hourly rate. You find your overtime rate by using your regular hourly rate, multiplying by either 1.5 or 2. You take the overtime rate and you multiply by the number just of overtime hours. You don't take the overtime rate and multiply it by all the hours you work, just the hours you've worked that are considered overtime. Your total pay is very simply the sum of the straight time pay and overtime pay, as seen in this equation right here. Total pay equals regular pay plus overtime pay. Okay? So that's a lot of definitions, but you do need to know what those are because we'll be referencing them frequently over the next few days in videos. Let's do the first few examples. Number 1, Tia earns $19.25 per hour. She works 36 hours. What is her straight time pay? So we have her hourly rate, $19.25, $19.25, and we're multiplying that by how many hours she worked. That's 36. We type those into the calculator, and we get $693. That's the answer. Her straight time pay, her pay that she gets for working those normal hours, is $693. Great. Let's do this next one. Shauna Jackson is a mail clerk. She earns $8.40 per hour. Last week, she worked 40 hours, and this week, she worked 39.5 hours. What is her straight time pay for each week? So we have 2 different weeks. So I'm going to write down last week and this week. Okay, last week and this week. Last week, she worked for 40 hours, and she earned $8.40 per hour. So I'm going to take $8.40 and multiply by 40. And that is $336. So last week she made $336. This week she didn't work all 40 hours, she only worked 39.5. So we take her $8.40 per hour, multiplied by 39.5, and she only made 331. It says 331.8, but when you write an amount of money, you always make it 2 decimals. So how do you make this 2 decimals? 80. $331.80. Okay? So you got to make sure that if you get a number like this and you know it's supposed to be an amount of money, if you don't have a second decimal place, just add on the 0. Okay? $331.80. All right. If you wanted to know the total that she made, you would simply add these together. Okay, let's see here. Our next example, our last example on this video, says you earn $8.50 per hour. How many hours will it take you to earn $1,088? So this is a little tricky. This is a little tricky because we're not looking for how much you make. We already know that. We're looking for how many hours will it take you? Well, if you look back at our equation here, that straight time pay equals hourly rate times the number of hours worked. We know the hourly rate, we know how much you're making, we just need to know how many hours you worked. So we have this, and we're looking for this. If you think about your algebra, what you would do at this point is you would divide both sides by the hourly rate. So you end up doing the straight time pay divided by the hourly rate equals the number of hours that you have to work. So I have the straight time pay. The total you want to make is $1,088. You make $8.50 per hour, and this should tell us how many hours you have to work. This is a little tricky. The answer is 128 hours. You would have to work for 128 hours, or probably a little more than 3 standard work weeks, in order to make that much money, based on that level of hourly rate. In the next video, we'll tackle overtime pay and straight time pay and kind of adding everything together to get total pay. All right? See you later.